The Galactic Concord Council chamber orbited the neutral world of Par 6, suspended in artificial gravity that made every delegate feel as though they were floating in the void of space itself. Holographic walls displayed the endless expanse of stars, creating the unsettling impression that any misstep might send one tumbling into the cosmic abyss. For aquatic species, like the Pelorian delegation, this produced a constant state of low-grade anxiety. Swimming through water was one thing, but the illusion of swimming through nothingness triggered ancestral fears they couldn't quite suppress. The chamber hummed with the nervous energy of 22 different species, each with their own unique method of expressing distress. The Vexillian Supreme Counselor Fee's bioluminescent skin patterns shifted from a calm blue to an agitated yellow as she surveyed the assembled representatives. The Tantaran delegation's wing membranes fluttered in synchronized rhythm, while the Axelac Ambassador Dort's antennae twitched violently with each new report of Dravid incursion. "This emergency session of the War Council is now in session," announced Supreme Counselor Fee, her voice translation echoing through the chamber's acoustic enhancers. "As you are all aware, the Dravid hegemony has forcibly incorporated 3 new star systems in the past solar cycle, threatening to destabilize the entire sector." Ambassador Dort of the Axelac Federation slammed his chitinous appendage against the obsidian table. "They've deployed atmosphere adjusters on Proxima Agricultural Belt. 3 billion souls. Gone. Just like that." The universal translator struggled to convey the clicking distress patterns underlying his words. A ripple of horrified murmurs swept through the chamber. The Galactic Concord, a loose federation of 37 species, occupying roughly 18% of the Milky Way, had existed for 12,000 cycles, primarily through mutual suspicion, bureaucratic inertia, and the shared understanding that extinction was bad for everyone's economy. But the Dravid hegemony's recent expansion threatened even this tenuous arrangement. "The Concord's diplomatic protests have been ignored," continued Fee, her luminescence now pulsing with diplomatic formality. "Economic sanctions have proven ineffective against their self-sufficient production model." "Of course they're ineffective," hissed General Vrex of the Tantoran Defense Command. "The hegemony doesn't value the same resources we do. They consider diversity inefficient." Supreme Counselor Fee's skin flashed a deep purple, the Vexillian equivalent of calling for silence. "The Council has deliberated extensively, and we have reached a decision that may seem unconventional." The chamber grew still. "We have invited observers from Earth to attend this War Council." Chaos erupted. A dozen voices shouted over one another as translation systems struggled to keep pace. The Zoran delegation's electromagnetic communication fields pulsed so intensely that several nearby datapads short-circuited. "Earth!" shrieked Ambassador Zakra of the Pelorian Collective. "The species that still uses combustion engines? The ones who broadcast violent entertainment across their entire planet? They've barely achieved interstellar travel." "Precisely," replied Fee, her bioluminescence steady and resolute. "The Dravid hegemony has extensively studied and predicted the behavior patterns of every conquered species. But humanity remains an unknown variable." "An unknown and chaotic variable," muttered Delegate Razathul of the Iridon Unity. "I've reviewed their historical archives. They've spent more time at war with themselves than at peace." Fee's skin patterns shifted to a decisive amber. "Which is exactly why we need them. The hegemony understands order and predictability. Humanity embodies neither." The debate continued for nearly an hour, with passionate arguments from all sides. The species that had already lost worlds to the hegemony were especially vocal in their opposition, the wounds of conquest still fresh. But when the final vote was tallied, the desperate logic of the situation prevailed. Humanity would be invited to observe the proceedings. "Let the Earth delegation enter," announced Fee, her voice transmission carrying a slight tremor. All eyes, optical sensors, and sensory appendages turned toward the grand entrance portal. For several moments, nothing happened. The chamber remained still, save for the gentle pulsing of the holographic starfield surrounding them. Then, with a hydraulic hiss that seemed almost anticlimactic, the doors parted. 4 humans entered the War Council chamber, walking at a casual pace that immediately struck many delegates as inappropriately relaxed given the gravity of the situation. The lead figure, a broad-shouldered human with close-cropped silver hair and a face etched with what some species recognized as age lines, held a steaming container in one hand. The 3 humans following closely behind similarly carried containers of the same design. Sorry we're late," announced Admiral Hayes with a disarming smile, taking a sip from his coffee cup. "Had to make a quick stop. Earth runs on caffeine. And trust me, you want us fully alert for this." A collective shock rippled through the assembly. Several delegates recoiled at the casual manner in which the humans had entered such a formal proceeding. Others were visibly horrified by the primitive liquid stimulant they consumed so openly. Admiral Hayes' team spread out beside him. Dr. Caldwell, the xenobiologist, was already scanning the room, her eyes cataloging each species with scientific interest. Commander Rodriguez, the tactical officer, maintained a relaxed posture that belied his careful assessment of the chamber's defensive capabilities. Professor Okonkwo, their diplomatic liaison, offered a formal bow to Supreme Counselor Fee. Admiral James Hayes, Earth Naval Command. The human leader introduced himself, his voice carrying easily across the chamber without technological assistance. "With me are Dr. Eliza Caldwell, Commander Miguel Rodriguez, and Professor Nnamdi Okonkwo. We appreciate the invitation to observe these proceedings." Before Fee could formulate a response, a low-frequency alert tone resonated through the chamber. The holographic displays shifted, revealing the approach of 12 identical figures moving in perfect synchronization. "The Dravid Hegemony delegation has arrived," announced Fee, her skin patterns now a stark, warning white. The humans watched with interest as the Hegemony representatives entered. Each delegate stood precisely 2 meters tall, with silver-gray skin that seemed to shimmer with an internal lattice of circuitry. They moved as a single unit, steps perfectly coordinated, as though controlled by one mind. Their eyes, if the reflective platinum discs embedded in their angular faces could be called eyes, swiveled in perfect unison to take in the chamber. "We bring the gift of harmony," announced the 12 Dravid representatives in perfect synchronization, their voices creating an unsettling harmonic chord. "One branch of law for all, one path of progress, one solution to eliminate conflict. By eliminating all who conflict with you," muttered Commander Rodriguez under his breath, though the chamber's acoustic system caught and translated his comment for all to hear. The Dravid representatives turned as one to face the human delegation. "Earth, a primitive world still engulfed in tribal divisions. Your inclusion is inefficient." Admiral Hayes took another slow sip of coffee. "We've been called worse." Supreme Counselor Fee quickly intervened, her skin patterns cycling through diplomatic protocols. "The Concord has received formal complaints from multiple worlds regarding hegemony expansion tactics. We will now hear testimony." General Vrek stepped forward, activating a holographic display. The hegemony employs a consistent attack pattern. They isolate star systems, disrupt communication networks, deploy autonomous drones to neutralize defensive capabilities, then land ground forces to establish control centers. "They call it harmonization," added Ambassador Dort bitterly. "As if genocide were merely tuning an instrument." The Arcturan representative activated another holographic display, showing 3 agricultural worlds, now rendered completely uninhabitable. These planets sustained millions of lives before hegemony, atmospheric adjustment devices, altered their chemical composition to levels toxic to all native life forms. "A regrettable miscalibration," responded the Dravid delegates in unison. The atmosphere was optimized for maximum resource extraction efficiency. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, her scientific interest now replaced with barely contained outrage. That wasn't a miscalibration. That was weaponized terraforming. She turned to address the council. I've analyzed the atmospheric readings. The changes were precise, targeted specifically at the biochemistry of the dominant species on each world. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate extinction. A murmur of horror rippled through the chamber. The concept of extinction is inefficient, replied the hegemony. All genetic material was preserved in our archives. Nothing of value was lost. Admiral Hayes set his coffee down with deliberate calm. You know, on Earth, we have terms for this sort of thing. Acceptable losses. Total war doctrine. Mutually assured destruction. Most civilizations discover these concepts early in their development. He paused, eyes fixed on the Dravid representatives. Most civilizations also learn to move beyond them. The chamber fell silent. Many delegates shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the implicit criticism of not just the hegemony, but perhaps the conquered itself. What would Earth suggest? Asked Supreme Counselor Fee, her bioluminescence pulsing with curiosity. Before Hayes could respond, the Dravid representatives spoke again. The Concord faces 3 options, each with statistically predictable outcomes. Continued resistance, probability of total defeat within 2.7 cycles, 94.3%. Negotiated surrender, preservation of 89.2% of current population, with 76.5% maintaining basic autonomy under hegemony oversight. Complete immediate surrender, preservation of 97.8% of population with limited cultural continuity. Those numbers seem very precise, noted Professor Okonkwo, speaking for the first time. Almost as if you've calculated every possible scenario. We have, responded the hegemony, with unmistakable pride. Every variable has been accounted for. Every outcome predicted. The path of harmony is inevitable. Professor Okonkwo smiled. How interesting. You've presented 3 options, all of which sound terribly boring. He glanced at Admiral Hayes, who nodded slightly. In my experience, there's always a 4th option, the one no one sees coming. Before the hegemony could respond, alarm signals blared throughout the chamber. The holographic walls shifted to display a massive fleet of Dravid vessels entering the PAR system, weapon systems glowing with barely contained energy. What is the meaning of this? Demanded Fee, her skin flashing alarmed crimson patterns. PAR 6 is a neutral diplomatic zone. A demonstration of inevitability, replied the hegemony delegates. A reminder that resistance is mathematically futile. Our calculations predict that after witnessing our fleet's capabilities, surrender probability increases by 42.7%. Panic spread through the chamber. The Tantoran delegates' wings fluttered wildly, while the Arcturan representatives huddled together in a defensive posture. Even Supreme Counselor Fee's bioluminescence betrayed her fear, flashing in chaotic, unstructured patterns. Amidst the chaos, Commander Rodriguez placed a small, coin-shaped device on the central table. The metallic disc emitted no visible light or sound, but several of the more sensitive species immediately reacted to its presence. "What is that?" demanded one of the Zoran delegates, their electromagnetic field fluctuating wildly. "I'm detecting unknown technology." Admiral Hayes stepped forward, his casual demeanor replaced with the commanding presence of a military leader. "If I could have everyone's attention, the Earth delegation would like to make a presentation." The chamber gradually quieted, all eyes now fixed on the human admiral. Even the Dravid representatives seemed momentarily caught off guard by the calm display of authority. "First, let's address the hegemony fleet currently threatening this neutral diplomatic station." Hayes began. He nodded to Commander Rodriguez, who activated a holographic display of his own. The image showed approximately 200 spacecraft of unfamiliar design, positioned at strategic points throughout the PAR system. Unlike the uniform, geometric precision of hegemony vessels, these ships varied in size and configuration, their surfaces seeming to absorb rather than reflect light. "What is this?" demanded the Dravid representatives, their synchronized voices showing the first hints of disharmony. "We detect no vessels matching these specifications in the PAR system." "Of course you don't," replied Hayes with a thin smile. "That's rather the point of stealth technology." A ripple of astonishment passed through the chamber. "Humanity may be new to interstellar travel," continued Hayes, "but we've been perfecting the art of hiding our military assets for centuries. Right now, approximately 200 Earth vessels are positioned throughout this system, each carrying enough firepower to neutralize a hegemony cruiser." The Dravid representatives conferred silently through their neural network. "Our sensors detect no such vessels. This is a deception." "Perhaps," Hayes acknowledged with a shrug. "Or perhaps your sensors aren't as infallible as you believe." He turned to Dr. Caldwell. "Doctor, would you mind sharing our second revelation with the Council?" Dr. Caldwell activated another holographic display. This one showed live feeds from multiple Dravid-controlled worlds. The Council watched in stunned silence as massive protests erupted across hegemony space, millions of beings from conquered worlds taking to the streets, many carrying crude weapons and improvised explosive devices. What is this?" demanded the Dravid representatives, their perfect synchronization now noticeably fragmented. "Cultural insurgency," explained Professor Okonkwo with evident satisfaction. "For the past 6 Earth years, we've been broadcasting human music, literature, and history throughout hegemony space, particularly our history of resistance against oppression." He smiled warmly. "It turns out that hope is contagious, even across species barriers." The Dravid representatives' unified front was visibly crumbling. Some moved slightly out of formation, their silver eyes flickering with individual thought patterns. "Impossible," they stated, though their harmonized voice now contained discordant notes. The populations were harmonized. Resistance impulses were eliminated. "You can never truly eliminate the desire for freedom," said Dr. Caldwell. "You can suppress it, yes, but like a spring under pressure, the moment you provide an opening, it explodes," finished Commander Rodriguez. Admiral Hayes nodded to Rodriguez, who activated the coin-shaped device on the table. A complex holographic display emerged, showing a network of interconnected nodes pulsing with energy. "This is what we call a dead hand system," explained Hayes. "It's linked to the vital signs of every human in this room, as well as to key locations on Earth and throughout human space. If the hegemony attempts any hostile action against humanity, it automatically triggers a response that would effectively eliminate faster-than-light capabilities across hegemony space." The chamber fell into stunned silence. "That's impossible," whispered one of the Arcturan delegates. "No species has developed technology capable of disrupting superluminal travel on that scale." "Perhaps," Hayes acknowledged with another casual shrug. "But is the hegemony willing to take that chance?" The Dravid representatives were now visibly disordered, their perfect formation broken as individual members moved slightly apart from one another. Their internal network was flooded with panicked alerts and conflicting directives. "You present fabricated evidence and empty threats," they stated, though their usual harmonic synchronization was now replaced by a cacophony of individual voices struggling to maintain unity. Hayes smiled. "Maybe, but I notice your fleet is already beginning to withdraw from the PAR system." All eyes turned to the holographic displays, where indeed, the hegemony vessels were altering course, moving away from the diplomatic station. "The fleet repositioning is a standard tactical adjustment," claimed the Dravid representatives, though few in the chamber appeared convinced. Supreme Counselor Phi's bioluminescence had shifted to a pattern indicating cautious optimism. It would appear that the situation has changed, she observed. Perhaps the hegemony would like to reconsider its ultimatum. Before the Dravid could respond, Ambassador Dort of the Axelak Federation approached the human delegation. Admiral Hayes, would Earth consider extending its protection to Axelak worlds? The question opened a floodgate. Within moments, representatives from a dozen species were crowding around the humans, offering resources, shipyard access, and even planetary orbital rights in exchange for human protection against the hegemony. The Dravid representatives watched in mounting horror as their carefully constructed network of fear collapsed around them. Without the unifying influence of their collective neural network, individual Dravid began displaying signs of uncertainty and even fear, emotions that had been engineered out of their species centuries ago. This council session will adjourn for one standard cycle, announced Supreme Counselor Fee, her skin now glowing with triumphant azure patterns. When we reconvene, the hegemony is invited to present terms for their immediate withdrawal from all illegally occupied territories. As the chamber emptied, the human delegation remained behind, watching as the Dravid representatives shuffled out in disarray, their once perfect synchronization now a shambles. When they were alone, Admiral Hayes and his team exchanged glances before breaking into awkward laughter. "Did we just accidentally become the dominant power in this sector of the galaxy?" asked Commander Rodriguez, still struggling to process what had happened. "It would appear so," replied Professor Okonkwo, his expression a mixture of amusement and concern. "Should we tell them?" asked Dr. Caldwell, nodding toward the door through which the Concord delegates had departed. Hayes took a final sip of his now cold coffee. "Tell them what? That the Dead Hand system is purely theoretical? That our stealth fleet consists of 2 experimental ships and a bunch of reflective debris designed to fool radar systems? That we've been bluffing our way through this entire encounter?" "Not entirely bluffing," corrected Professor Okonkwo. "The cultural insurgency is very real. We have been broadcasting human culture throughout this region. Yes, but we had no idea it would trigger actual revolutions," noted Dr. Caldwell. "That was a happy accident." Admiral Hayes' communication device chimed. He glanced at it and grimaced. "Well, the Earth Parliament is already sending requests for coffee export rights and shipbuilding technology." He sighed heavily. "We said fake it till you make it, right? Looks like we'd better start making it, and fast." Commander Rodriguez picked up the deactivated holographic projector. "At least we've bought ourselves some time. The hegemony will be busy dealing with internal rebellions for the foreseeable future. And the conquered species now see us as their protectors," added Dr. Caldwell. "That gives us considerable leverage." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "We came here expecting to observe a galactic war council. Instead, we've found ourselves at the center of a new interstellar alliance." He straightened his uniform. "I suppose there are worse outcomes." "Indeed," agreed Professor Okonkwo. "Though I suspect our real work is just beginning." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Supreme Counselor Fee reappeared, her bioluminescence pulsing with what the humans were beginning to recognize as excitement. "Admiral Hayes," she began, "the Concord Council requests a more permanent Earth presence on the War Council. Your perspective has proven invaluable." Hayes exchanged glances with his team before responding with a smile. "We would be honored, Counselor. Though I should warn you, where humans go, chaos tends to follow." Fee's skin rippled with what might have been laughter. After centuries of stagnant order, a little chaos might be exactly what this galaxy needs. As the humans followed Fee out of the chamber, the holographic stars continued their endless dance around them, witnesses to the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. One where a species that still used combustion engines and drank caffeinated beverages had somehow become the most feared and respected force in the known universe. The war had been averted not through superior firepower, but through a potent combination of bluffing, cultural influence, and the universal power of hope. It was a lesson the hegemony would not soon forget, and one that humanity was only beginning to understand. In the vast tapestry of galactic civilization, a new thread had been woven, bright, unpredictable, and irrevocably changing the pattern of power across the stars. The first time humans visited a war council, half the galaxy surrendered voluntarily. The other half would soon wish they had. The galactic Concord had existed for 12,000 cycles, maintained through an uneasy balance of mutual suspicion and shared economic interests. From the crystalline hive minds of the Axillac Federation to the photosynthetic collectives of the Vepulan Reach, 37 distinct species had learned to coexist, if not always harmoniously. But the rise of the Dravid hegemony had upset this delicate equilibrium. Supreme Counselor Phi adjusted her ceremonial mantle as she prepared to reconvene the War Council. The past cycle had seen frantic diplomatic activity, with species that had been bitter rivals for centuries now seeking alliances against the common threat. Most surprising of all had been the sudden prominence of humanity, a species that most of the Concord had previously considered too primitive to warrant serious attention. "The War Council will now resume session," announced Phi, her bioluminescent patterns projecting authority throughout the chamber. "We will begin by hearing the hegemony's response to yesterday's developments." The Dravid representatives entered, and immediately the chamber noted the difference. Where before they had moved in perfect unison, now their formation showed subtle irregularities. Some walked slightly faster than others, and their once identical postures now displayed individual variations. "The hegemony acknowledges the unexpected factors introduced by the Earth delegation," they announced. Their voices still synchronized but lacking the perfect harmonic quality of before. "We propose a temporary cessation of expansion activities, while we reassess integration protocols." Ambassador Dort's antennae twitched with barely contained excitement. "That's not good enough. We demand immediate withdrawal from all occupied territories and reparations for worlds rendered uninhabitable." Admiral Hayes, who had been quietly observing, raised a hand. The chamber immediately fell silent. "The hegemony is facing internal challenges," Hayes noted calmly. "Revolutionary movements don't disappear overnight. I suggest we offer terms that allow them to save face while meeting our essential demands." The Dravid representatives turned their silver eyes toward Hayes, individual expressions of surprise and calculation visible for the first time. "What terms would Earth propose?" they asked, their voices now distinctly separate rather than perfectly harmonized. Hayes smiled. "Immediate cessation of all harmonization activities. Gradual withdrawal from occupied territories over the next 6 months, with conquered observers to ensure compliance. A buffer zone established between hegemony and conquered space, and a technological exchange program to benefit all parties." "These terms are unexpected," replied the hegemony representatives after a moment of silent conference. "We had calculated a 98.7% probability of punitive demands." "Humans often defy probability," explained Professor Okonkwo with a slight smile. "We find that rebuilding bridges tends to be more productive than burning them." Supreme Counselor Phi's skin rippled with approval. "The Concord is willing to consider these terms, provided the withdrawal begins immediately and verifiably." The lead Dravid representative stepped forward, a shocking break from their previous collective behavior. "The hegemony accepts these preliminary terms. We request a delegation to discuss implementation details." "Agreed," said Phi, her bioluminescence pulsing with barely contained triumph. "The delegation will include representatives from affected worlds and Earth observers." As the formal proceedings continued, Dr. Caldwell leaned toward Hayes. "That was remarkably generous," she whispered, "especially considering what they did to those agricultural worlds." Hayes nodded grimly. "Justice is important, but stability more so. Besides, those rebellions we accidentally sparked will extract their own form of justice. Better to give the hegemony a path to reform than to back them into a corner. Very pragmatic, noted Commander Rodriguez with approval. Though I suspect some of the affected species won't be satisfied. They won't, agreed Hayes. But they'll accept it because they now see Earth as their protector, which gives us time to actually develop the capabilities they think we already have. The meeting concluded with the establishment of multiple working groups to oversee the peace process. As delegates filed out of the chamber, Supreme Counselor Fee approached the human delegation. Admiral Hayes, the Concord Council has voted unanimously to offer Earth full membership in the Galactic Concord, with a permanent seat on the War Council. Hayes raised an eyebrow. That's quite a promotion from observer status. Fee's skin patterns shifted to indicate sincerity. Your species has accomplished in one cycle what our combined diplomatic efforts failed to achieve in 50. The hegemony threat has dominated our concerns for generations. Now, thanks to Earth, we have hope for lasting peace. We accept your offer, Hayes replied, after a brief consultation with his team. Though I should warn you, Earth has its own internal divisions and challenges. We're not the unified force we may have appeared to be yesterday. No species is truly unified, observed Fee with a ripple of philosophical bioluminescence. The Concord has thrived despite our differences, or perhaps because of them. Diversity of thought leads to innovation. The hegemony's obsession with uniformity was always their fundamental weakness. As they left the council chamber, the human delegation found themselves surrounded by representatives from a dozen different species, each eager to establish bilateral relations with Earth. We would be honored to host an Earth embassy on Axelac Prime, chittered Ambassador Dort, his antennae quivering with excitement. The Tantoran Defense Command offers joint military exercises with your stealth fleet, added General Vrex, wing membranes extended in a gesture of respect. The Arcturan Science Consortium requests access to your Dead Hand System technology for purely theoretical study, ventured another delegate. Hayes exchanged amused glances with his team. The bluff was still holding, but sooner or later, they would need to deliver on at least some of their implied capabilities. Earth appreciates all offers and will consider them carefully, Hayes replied diplomatically. Our immediate priority is establishing formal diplomatic relations with all conquered species. As the throng of eager delegates dispersed, Commander Rodriguez chuckled softly. I've never seen such an enthusiastic response to a first contact scenario. Usually there's at least some xenophobia. Fear is a powerful motivator, noted Professor Okonkwo. They feared the hegemony more than they fear us, for now, at least, which means we have a limited window to establish ourselves as benevolent allies rather than conquering saviors, added Dr. Caldwell. Once the hegemony threat recedes, attitudes might shift. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Then we'd better make the most of this opportunity. Earth has stumbled into a position of galactic influence we're nowhere near prepared for. Our job now is to ensure we live up to the faith these species have placed in us. Even though that faith is based largely on elaborate deception? Asked Rodriguez with a raised eyebrow. Especially because of that, replied Hayes firmly. We made promises we couldn't keep. But now, we need to find a way to keep them anyway. The alternative is to admit we bluffed our way into galactic politics, which would destroy our credibility overnight. So we maintain the illusion while frantically trying to develop the reality, summarized Dr. Caldwell. Quite a challenge. Indeed, agreed Hayes. But humanity has always excelled at overcoming impossible odds. And now, we have potential allies with technologies far beyond our own. If we play this right, the bluff that saved the conquered could lead to a genuine golden age for all species involved, including our own. As they made their way back to the Earth shuttle, their communication devices chimed simultaneously with urgent messages from Earth Parliament, requests for status updates, demands for technological acquisitions, and no fewer than 17 proposals for interspecies trade agreements flooded their screens. Hayes sighed deeply. And so it begins. The political fallout. He straightened his uniform with renewed determination. Let's hope Earth's politicians don't undo in a day what we've accomplished here. Perhaps we should remind them of the stakes, suggested Professor Okonkwo. If Earth appears divided or unreliable, our new allies might reconsider their faith in us. Good luck explaining galactic politics to politicians who still argue about national borders, muttered Commander Rodriguez. We'll manage, said Hayes with quiet confidence. We always do. Humanity's greatest strength has always been our adaptability. Now, we just need to adapt to being a galactic power overnight. As their shuttle departed the Par 6 diplomatic station, they watched through the viewport as hegemony vessels continued their withdrawal from the system. The immediate crisis had been averted, but the real work was just beginning. The first time humans visited a war council, half the galaxy had surrendered voluntarily. Now they just had to figure out what to do with it. 6 months after the historic war council, Admiral Hayes stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Earth Embassy on Axelac Prime. The crystalline spires of the Axelac capital glittered beneath twin suns, while diplomatic vessels from a dozen different species maneuvered through the busy orbital lanes above. Quite a view, remarked Supreme Counselor Fee, who had traveled personally to attend the embassy's formal opening. Her bioluminescent patterns reflected appreciation for the architectural aesthetics. Indeed, agreed Hayes. Hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time. And change it had. The hegemony withdrawal was proceeding ahead of schedule, with former, harmonized worlds beginning the long process of cultural recovery. Earth had established diplomatic relations with 29 Concord species and initiated technology exchange programs with 17. The first alien embassy on Earth, a Vexillian outpost in Geneva, had opened just last week to much fanfare and media attention. The Concord Council has received the first progress report on your Dead Hand System implementation, noted Fee casually, her skin patterns betraying nothing. Hayes maintained a neutral expression. This was the moment he had been dreading. Earth scientists had been working frantically to develop something resembling the fictional technology he had described. But they were years, perhaps decades, from anything functional. And, he prompted when Fee didn't continue. And we are most impressed by Earth's decision to scale back the project in favor of more defensive technologies, replied Fee, her bioluminescence shifting to indicate approval. It shows wisdom and restraint. Hayes nearly laughed with relief. The Concord had interpreted Earth's inability to deliver the promised technology as a deliberate moral choice. We've always believed that defense should take priority over mutually assured destruction, he replied smoothly, making a mental note to update the official narrative. A philosophy the Concord shares, agreed Fee. Though I must admit, some council members were surprised by Earth's technological limitations in certain areas. Your species presented such an impressive initial appearance. There it was, the first hint that the Concord was beginning to see through the bluff. We have our strengths and weaknesses, acknowledged Hayes carefully. Stealth technology and cultural adaptation are areas where we excel. Other fields remain, works in progress. Fee's skin rippled with what Hayes had come to recognize as amusement. Admiral, let me speak plainly, without diplomatic filters. The Concord is aware that Earth's capabilities were somewhat exaggerated during the War Council. Hayes maintained his composure, though his heart rate accelerated. What makes you say that? We have been monitoring the revolutionary movements across former hegemony space, explained Fee. While your cultural transmissions certainly played a role in inspiring resistance, the scale and coordination suggest additional factors at work, factors that predated Earth's involvement. I see, said Hayes, considering his options. Continued deception seemed pointless, yet admitting the full extent of the bluff could damage Earth's standing. What's perhaps most remarkable, continued Fee, her bioluminescence now pulsing with something like admiration. Is that it doesn't matter. Whether your stealth fleet consisted of 2 ships or 200, whether your dead hand system was real or theoretical, the outcome remains the same. The hegemony threat has been neutralized, and the Concord has found a valuable new ally. Hayes relaxed slightly. You're not concerned that we misrepresented our capabilities? Fee's skin pattern shifted to philosophical mode. Admiral, every species in the Concord has exaggerated their strengths and concealed their weaknesses at some point in their diplomatic history. What matters is not the deception itself, but the intent behind it and the actions that follow. Her bioluminescence intensified. Earth could have used the sudden power shift to dominate the Concord. Instead, you've worked to establish genuine partnerships and mutual benefit. That speaks more to your species' character than any technological marvel. Thank you for your understanding, said Hayes, genuinely moved by Fee's perspective. Earth remains committed to fulfilling our responsibilities to the Concord, even if some of our methods were unorthodox. Unorthodox methods saved the Concord, replied Fee simply. We value results over protocol. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Okonkwo, accompanied by a delegation of Axelac scientists. The professor's eyes gleamed with excitement. Admiral, you won't believe what the Axelac have developed based on our cultural exchange program, he announced. They've created a communication system that encodes information in cultural references and contextual patterns. It's completely indecipherable to the hegemony's analytical algorithms. Hayes smiled. That sounds promising. More than promising, chittered the lead Axelac scientist, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light. Initial tests show a 99.8% security rating against known hegemony decryption methods. And it's just the beginning of what our combined approach to information theory can achieve. As the scientists launched into technical details, Hayes caught Fee's knowing gaze. This was the real strength humanity brought to the Concord, not imaginary superweapons, but a fundamentally different way of thinking that complemented the established species approaches. Later that evening, as the formal embassy reception wound down, Hayes found a quiet moment with his original team. So, the Concord knows we were bluffing, summarized Commander Rodriguez after Hayes recounted his conversation with Fee. But they don't care because they like the results. Essentially, confirmed Hayes. Though I suspect some species are less forgiving than the Vexillians, we should remain vigilant. The latest reports from hegemony space are encouraging, noted Dr. Caldwell. The unified control structure continues to fragment. Individual Dravid communities are developing distinct identities for the first time in centuries. Some are even embracing aspects of human culture, music, art, literature. Cultural victory, said Professor Okonkwo with satisfaction. Sometimes the most effective weapons aren't weapons at all. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. True enough, though we shouldn't get complacent. The technology gap between Earth and most conquered species remains substantial. But narrowing, pointed out Rodriguez. The joint development projects are yielding results faster than anyone anticipated. It turns out humans ask questions that other species never considered, and vice versa. The collaborative potential is enormous. Which brings us back to where we started, said Hayes. We bluffed our way into galactic relevance, but now we have a genuine opportunity to earn the position we claimed. The question is, what kind of galactic power does Earth want to be? One that values diversity over uniformity, suggested Dr. Caldwell immediately. The hegemony's fundamental error was believing that harmony required everyone to be the same. We know better. One that promotes cultural exchange alongside technological development, added Professor Okonkwo. The Conquered had stagnated partly because species remained isolated in their own worldviews. One that maintains adequate defense capabilities while prioritizing peaceful cooperation, said Commander Rodriguez, surprising the others with his emphasis on peace rather than military strength. Hayes nodded, satisfied with their responses. All valuable principles. I'll make sure they're incorporated into Earth's formal Concord policy. As the group dispersed for the evening, Hayes remained on the embassy's observation deck, watching the alien city below. 6 months ago, he had been a naval officer from a planet barely known to the galactic community. Now he was helping shape interstellar policy for dozens of worlds. All because of a bluff, a cup of coffee, and humanity's knack for improvisation. His communication device chimed with an incoming message from Earth. The Parliament had approved funding for a substantial expansion of the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps. Whatever happened next, Earth was committed to its new role in galactic affairs. Hayes smiled to himself. They had faked it. Now they were making it. And the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year after the War Council that changed everything, a formal celebration was held in the Galactic Concord's central chamber. Representatives from 42 species, including 5 former hegemony worlds that had applied for independent membership, gathered to commemorate what historians were already calling the dawn of cooperative expansion. Admiral Hayes, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Concord, stood alongside Supreme Counselor Fee as they watched the assembled delegates. The chamber buzzed with dozens of languages, translation systems working overtime to facilitate the complex web of conversations. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here as an ambassador, Hayes remarked quietly, I'd have questioned their sanity. Fee's skin rippled with amusement. The universe rarely unfolds as we expect, Admiral. Sometimes that works in our favor. The formal proceedings began with a commemoration of worlds lost to hegemony expansion, followed by progress reports on recovery efforts in liberated systems. When it came time for Earth's address, Hayes approached the central platform with measured confidence. 1 year ago, humanity stumbled onto the galactic stage with more bravado than experience, he began, earning appreciative murmurs from the assembly. We came armed with coffee, theoretical technology, and a stubborn refusal to accept mathematical certainty. A ripple of translator-delayed laughter spread through the chamber. Since then, we've worked to transform bravado into substance. The Earth-Concord Technology Exchange has yielded advancements that benefit all our worlds. The Cultural Harmonization Initiative, a term we've reclaimed from its previous, more sinister usage, has fostered understanding across species barriers, and the Joint Defense Protocol has ensured that no single power can ever again threaten the diversity we all cherish. Hayes paused, surveying the chamber. Even the representatives from reformed Dravid worlds were listening attentively, their once uniform appearance now displaying individual variations in attire and expression. But perhaps our greatest achievement has been learning from each other, he continued. Earth has gained knowledge spanning thousands of cycles of galactic development. In return, we've shared our most valuable resource, our perspective, our questions, our stubborn insistence that impossible is merely a challenge to overcome. As Hayes concluded his address, the chamber erupted in approval. Tantaran wing membranes fluttered in synchronized applause. Axelac delegates clicked their appendages in their species' expression of agreement. Even the stoic Zoran representatives pulsed their electromagnetic fields in patterns of appreciation. Following the formal ceremony, Hayes found himself approached by an unexpected visitor, a Dravid representative from one of the reformed worlds. Unlike the uniform appearance of the hegemony delegates from a year ago, this individual wore colorful attire and displayed distinctive cranial ridges that had previously been suppressed as inefficient variation. Ambassador Hayes, the Dravid greeted him with a slight bow. I am Nexor, representing the Dravid Confederation of Independent Systems. Hayes returned the gesture. A pleasure to meet you. Representative Nexor, how goes the Reformation process? Challenging but rewarding, replied Nexor. After centuries of enforced uniformity, rediscovering individual identity is complex. But the cultural materials from Earth have been invaluable guides. particularly your historical records of societies transitioning from authoritarianism to self-governance. I'm glad we could help, said Hayes sincerely. Though I must admit, we never anticipated becoming inspirational figures for former hegemony worlds. Nexor's expression shifted to what Hayes had learned to recognize as thoughtful amusement. The universe unfolds in unexpected patterns. Ambassador. The mathematics of chaos theory suggests that small variations can lead to profound systemic changes. He paused. A concept the hegemony understood but feared. Earth, it seems, embraces such unpredictability. We've had to, admitted Hayes. Our history is littered with unexpected outcomes, both good and bad. We've learned to adapt. A valuable skill, noted Nexor. One the reformed Dravid worlds are working to develop. He hesitated before continuing. There is something I believe you should know, Ambassador. Something about the hegemony that wasn't revealed during the War Council. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Oh? The hegemony's expansion wasn't merely about efficiency or resources, explained Nexor, lowering his voice. It was driven by fear. Our long-range sensors had detected something approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Something troubling. A chill ran down Hayes' spine. What kind of something? We don't know precisely, admitted Nexor. Only that it doesn't match any known pattern of natural phenomenon or technological signature. The hegemony believed that only through complete unification could the galaxy withstand whatever is coming. When were these observations made? Asked Hayes, his mind racing with implications. The initial detection occurred 300 cycles ago, replied Nexor. Based on calculated trajectory and velocity, whatever it is will reach the outer systems within 50 years, by your Earth calendar. Hayes maintained his diplomatic composure, despite the alarming news. Why are you telling me this now? Because the reformed Dravid worlds have continued the observation program, said Nexor. And we've recently detected a change. Whatever is approaching has altered course. It appears to be accelerating. Suggesting intelligence rather than natural phenomenon, concluded Hayes grimly. Nexor nodded. Precisely. The hegemony's approach to this threat was fundamentally flawed. Unity through force creates only fragility. But the threat itself may be very real. I appreciate your candor, said Hayes. This information needs to be shared with the Concord Council immediately. Agreed, said Nexor. But perhaps with some caution. Not all species respond well to existential uncertainty. As Nexor departed, Hayes sought out his original team members, who had remained key figures in Earth's interstellar relations. Dr. Caldwell now headed the Xenobiology Exchange Program. Commander Rodriguez supervised the Joint Defense Initiative. Professor Okonkwo directed the Cultural Harmonization Project. Hayes briefed them quickly on Nexor's revelation. Well, said Rodriguez after a moment of stunned silence. Just when we thought we were getting the hang of galactic politics. If this is accurate, it changes everything, noted Dr. Caldwell. An external threat of unknown origin and capabilities. It explains the hegemony's obsession with uniformity, observed Professor Okonkwo. They believed only a single, unified response could be effective. What they failed to understand is that diversity of approach increases the probability of finding successful strategies. Hayes nodded. Exactly. And that's where Earth's experience becomes relevant again. He smiled grimly. We've spent our history imagining external threats, science fiction, speculation, preparation scenarios. No other species has devoted so much cultural energy to the question, what if we're not alone, and what if they're not friendly? So, once again, humanity finds itself at the center of galactic affairs, summarized Rodriguez. Not because of our technology or our military might, but because of our imagination, completed Dr. Caldwell. Our capacity to envision the unimaginable and prepare for the unpredictable. The question is how to proceed, said Hayes thoughtfully. We need to alert the Concord without causing panic. while simultaneously accelerating defensive preparations. A combined scientific and cultural approach would be most effective, suggested Professor Okonkwo. Research into the phenomenon alongside preparation of public consciousness for the possibility of external contact, and discrete military readiness initiatives, added Rodriguez. Not fear-mongering, but prudent preparation. Hayes nodded decisively. We'll present a unified recommendation to Earth Parliament and the Concord Council. If this threat is real, we'll need every species working together, not through forced harmony, but through genuine cooperation. As they dispersed to begin their preparations, Hayes found himself alone with his thoughts, watching the diverse assembly of galactic representatives. 1 year ago, humanity had bluffed its way into becoming a galactic power. Now, they faced a challenge that would require all their actual strengths: adaptability, creativity, and indomitable spirit. The first time humans visited a war council, half the galaxy had surrendered voluntarily. The next time, they might need to lead that same galaxy against a threat none of them fully understood. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was facing the unknown with a cup of coffee in hand and determination in their hearts. Whatever was coming from beyond the galactic rim would discover that the species of the Milky Way were no longer divided and vulnerable. They had found common purpose in their very diversity, a lesson learned not through conquest, but through an accidental alliance born of coffee, bluffing, and the universal power of hope. The galactic stage had been set. The next act was about to begin. And humanity, despite all odds, would be ready.